What if the only way a mafia boss can escape his bloody legacy is to hire the exact woman who shatters his pristine world on day one? When Lila Bennett breaks Dante Morelli's replica Ming vase, it's not just a clumsy accident, it's a brilliant metaphor for the dismantling of his father's corrupt syndicate. Dante isn't just grooming an assistant, he's actively seeking an ethical compass to break his family's cycle of violence. This isn't a simple romance. It's a psychological study of a man trying to wash the blood off his ledger and the mathematical genius who calculates the true deadly cost of his redemption.
The genesis of their connection was not a meeting, but a collision, a shattering of glass on Lila Bennett's first day. In that frozen moment, she brought all motion to a halt around Dante Morelli, a man who famously purged an underling for a single typo. Yet his response was not rage. It was a flicker of dark amusement. An incident of spilled coffee and broken heirlooms became the foundation of a perilous symbiosis within the city's underworld. This is the chronicle of their convergence, a volatile fusion of impulse and order, fated to either forge an unbreakable alliance or trigger utter annihilation. The ascent to the 47th floor of Morelli Tower was a gut-wrenching climb for Lila. She hugged a worn portfolio to her chest, a useless shield against the distorted woman she saw in the polished steel walls, an imposter. The professional facade she'd built was cracking, rebellious strands of blonde hair breaking free. A small coffee stain marked the hem of her navy interview dress, a flaw she tried in vain to hide. Her reflection earned a whispered, desperate prayer. "You're fine." Her inner voice fought for calm. "It's a simple job. An assistant, answering phones, filing papers, maybe some light bookkeeping. You've handled worse." The elevator chimed its arrival. Its doors slid open onto a sterile expanse that felt hostile to human life. The world was black, white, and chrome, reflected in polished marble floors. The furniture looked expensive and exquisitely uncomfortable. Behind a severe, futuristic desk sat a woman whose tightly pulled hair seemed to be the source of a permanent headache. She looked up. "You are late," the woman declared, skipping any greeting. Layla glanced at her watch. "I'm actually 7 minutes early." "Mr. Morelli expects his appointments 15 minutes ahead of the scheduled time. You are late." The woman's eyes were flat, brown discs that showed no light. "Name?" "Lila Bennett. I have an appointment for 9 a.m. "I'm aware of why you are here." She rose with a motion that felt like a threat, a tall, angular woman in a black suit that cost more than Lila's rent. "Follow me. Touch nothing. Do not speak unless Mr. Morelli addresses you. And keep your eyes down until he looks at you. For your own sake, do not waste his time." Lila absorbed the barrage of commands. "Is this an interview or a shakedown?" The woman's face was a stone mask. "With Mr. Morelli, there is rarely a difference." They walked down a hall lined with art that was either priceless or a joke. The carpet was so plush, her feet sank with every step. From behind closed doors came a thick, pressurized silence, the sound of people terrified to make a sound. "Sorry," Lila said, filling the void. "I didn't catch your name." "I didn't give it." The woman stopped at a pair of massive dark wood doors with chrome handles. "This is his office. He's on a call. When the light above the door turns green, you may enter, not 1 second before." "What if it stays red?" "Then you will continue to wait." "For how long?" The woman stared as if the question itself was an insult to logic. "Until it turns green, or until Mr. Morelli decides your appointment is canceled, whichever comes first." With that, she turned, her heels clicking in the marble like a metronome, and left Lila alone with the searing red light. Exactly 9 a.m. on time for the real world, but in this universe, she was already failing. The minutes crawled by, the red light unblinking. A voice bled through the door, deep, even, and radiating an authority that never needed to be raised. The words were a muffled murmur, but the tone was absolute. It wasn't angry or gentle. It was the sound of truth being delivered as fact. A sharp pain began to build in Lila's feet. The borrowed heels were half a size too small, a last-minute replacement for her own, which a city grate and a puddle had claimed. She shifted her weight again, the portfolio suddenly feeling like a lead weight. She set it down, then snatched it back up, feeling as if leaving something in the immaculate floor was a punishable offense. The light flashed green. Lila grabbed the handle and pushed. The heavy door didn't move. She pushed harder. Nothing. It was a pull door, a stupid, basic mistake. She yanked it open, the door's momentum pulling her off balance and into the room. Her heel caught the thick carpet, and she pitched forward as if shoved from behind, her portfolio flying from her grip. Its contents exploded across the dark floor, resumes, reference letters, and sample spreadsheets scattering like fallen leaves. Lila's body then met an immovable object with a sickeningly loud crack. Sensation flooded her, the sound of porcelain shattering, the scent of old books and expensive cologne, and then a deafening, profound silence. She was on her hands and knees in the glittering wreckage of what had been a vase. Not just any vase. This was museum quality, blue and white. Its ancient stories now just expensive trash. "No," Lila breathed. "This is not happening. Get up." The voice came from behind a desk the size of a small car. It was the same one from the hall. Sharper now. It was impossibly, terrifyingly calm. Lila scrambled to stand, her movements clumsy on shaky legs and in ill-fitting shoes. She found her footing only to step on a loose page of her own resume, the glossy paper sliding like ice beneath her heel. She flailed, grabbing a bookshelf to steady herself. Her hand knocked a small sculpture, which toppled to the floor and split in two. "Do not move," the voice commanded. Lila froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. In 15 seconds, she had caused thousands of dollars in damages. "I am so incredibly sorry," she stammered. "I will pay for it. I don't know how, but I'll figure it out. I can get a second job. I will." "Look at me." Lila obeyed, lifting her gaze from the field of destruction. Dante Morelli sat observing her perfectly still, like a predator deciding if a new creature was food or entertainment. He looked younger than she expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with dark, severe hair and features that looked carved from stone. He wore a flawless black suit, but no tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that felt more menacing than formal attire. His eyes were a true, bottomless dark that seemed to swallow the light. He studied her, not as a person, but as an equation he was solving. "You are Lila Bennett," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." Her voice was a faint whisper. I was here for the interview. I am so sorry about the vase." It was a 14th century piece from the Ming Dynasty, valued at approximately $80,000. The blood drained from Lila's face, a cold wave of shock washing over her. I'll work out a payment plan." "It was also a fake?" He tilted his head. "I keep the real one elsewhere. This office gets too much foot traffic for genuine artifacts." She stared, processing the whiplash. "So I didn't just break. You broke a $1,500 replica, a notable and careless loss, but not a disaster." He stood, and his height seemed to shrink the room around him. The sculpture you knocked over, however, was real. 18th century ivory. You will be paying me for that. Lila's eyes dropped to the new pieces of ruin by her feet. How much is it worth? That depends entirely on whether you survive the next 10 minutes. He came around the desk with the predator's deliberate grace. Tell me, Ms. Bennett, do you make a habit of destroying things, or am I witnessing a special occasion? This is a very, very bad day for me, she managed, knowing how pathetic it sounded. I believe I'm competent, organized, His voice cut through hers. You are standing in the wreckage of porcelain and your career. He moved toward her, his proximity revealing a thin scar by his left eyebrow. Your shoes are ill-fitting, your dress is stained. Hope and a broken zipper seem to be all that holds your portfolio together. Every paper is marred by the ring of a wet glass. Heat bloomed in Layla's cheeks. There are reasons for this. Do not voice them. He knelt, a gesture that brought his gaze level with hers and was far more unnerving than his height, plucking a resume from the floor. He read it, the silence absolute. His mind cataloged her history. Columbia mathematics, full scholarship, highest honors. 3 years as a financial analyst at Meridian Hecht before it imploded. His eyes bored into her. Why an assistant's job with credentials that outshine half my management? Because I need work, Layla said, her honesty a clinical instrument. And no one will hire someone from a firm indicted for fraud, regardless of my innocence. You were in their accounting. Data analysis, I found the errors. I reported them. The FBI then found far worse, and the company shattered. She held his gaze, the look of a person with nothing left to lose. I did the right thing, and it cost me everything. Now I'm starting over, apparently by destroying your office. Something shifted in Dante's face, not a softening. He seemed incapable of it, but the click of a theory locking into place. You're the one who reported the fraud, he stated. Yes, knowing it would destroy your position. I reported it because people were about to lose their life savings if I did nothing. Layla felt her voice rise, a dangerous tremor of emotion she couldn't leash. I never imagined the entire firm would collapse. I thought it would be fixed. I was wrong. Dante rose, her file clutched in his hand. And now you're insolvent, unemployable, and desperate enough to come to me. I researched your company, Layla countered. Morelli Enterprises has 17 subsidiaries, 6 commercial properties, and a history of aggressive growth with perfect books. Publicly, your business is pristine. Publicly, Dante echoed, the faintest hint of cold amusement in his tone. It might have been. I need a job, Layla pressed on. I am good at what I do. I'm meticulous, fast, and I don't ask questions I don't need answers to. That last part is a lie. You already questioned my receptionist. I asked for her name. So, which she didn't give you, because her purpose is not to make friends. He glided back to his desk, navigating the field of shattered ceramic by instinct alone. I've had 4 assistants in the past 2 years. The first fled after 3 days. The second had a nervous breakdown in a week. The third was late twice. The fourth tried to steal from me. What happened to them? The first 3 found other work. The fourth is no longer a factor. He sat, gesturing to the vacant chair. Sit. Layla measured the chair, then the minefield of debris between them. She picked her way through the wreckage, deliberately avoiding each shard, and took her seat. The chair was as uncomfortable as she had expected. Dante opened a drawer and slid out a slim folder. I will ask you 3 questions. Answer them truthfully. If I sense a lie, this interview is over, and your chances of finding work in this city will evaporate. Understood? Layla's mouth went dry. Understood. First, why are you really here today? I told you You need a job, yes, but you've applied to 43 firms in 6 months. I know because I ran a complete background check on you yesterday. He leaned back. 37 of those were for positions like your last. 5 were lateral moves. This is the only one that is a massive step down, so I ask again, why here? Layla steadied her breath. The truth or a version of it? He would know the difference, she was sure of it. Because every other company sees my resume and labels me incompetent or criminal, she said. The fraud connection killed my chances, but your firm is known for collecting assets others have thrown away. You have 3 executives from bankrupt companies. You hired a woman who'd been fired 6 times. That suggests either a rare kind of forgiveness or that you ignore standard hiring rules. Or that I value ability over a clean record. That's also possible. Layla met his stare. My theory is that you judge people by their use to you, not by the failures of others. Dante was silent for a long beat. Second question. What truly brought down Moretti and Hecht? The fraud investigation. That's the public story. What's the real one? Layla hesitated. It was a trap, but she couldn't see the trigger. The fraud was real, she began carefully, but it wasn't the whole story. Moretti had taken on immense debt for expansion. When the investigation froze their assets, they couldn't make payroll. It was a chain reaction. Clients fled. Creditors called in their markers, and the whole thing collapsed in 3 weeks. The fraud was just the spark on gasoline-soaked wood. You knew it was coming. It was a statement, not a query. But Layla answered. I saw the pattern forming 6 months before it happened. I took it up the chain of command. They ignored me. Why? Because I was 26 years old, telling men twice my age that their business model was fatally flawed. They dismissed my forecast as hysterics. The acid of bitterness coated her own words. She fought to swallow it. They were wrong. I was right. The outcome didn't care. Dante lifted a pen and clicked it once. The sound was a gunshot in the still room. Third question. If I hire you and you find something wrong in my books, what do you do? This was the entire test. Layla knew it. I would bring it directly to you, she said, and I would help you fix it. Not to the authorities? Not without your direct order. Layla leaned forward slightly. I learned my lesson at Moretti. Going outside the chain of command doesn't solve anything. It just creates chaos. If my job is to serve you, then I serve you. Not the FBI, not the SEC, nobody else. Is that loyalty or moral flexibility? It's pragmatic, Layla countered. I can't fix a system from the outside. I can only do it if I'm trusted on the inside. Dante clicked the pen again. Once, twice. He set it down, perfectly parallel to his notepad. You start Monday, he said. 0800. Precise. Not 8:15, not a minute before. 0800. Layla felt a knot of tension dissolve in her chest. Thank you, I promise. Your salary is $60,000 a year. Benefits start after 90 days. You report only to me, meaning you will work longer hours than anyone else here and handle information that could put you at risk if it leaks. You will not speak of my business to anyone. You will not ask about matters that are not your concern. And you will never, ever break another thing in this office. I understand. You'll sign an NDA so restrictive your lawyer will tell you not to. You'll sign it anyway because you need this job more than you need protection. He stood up. The ivory figure you broke was worth $4,000. It will be garnished from your first 3 paychecks. The vase was my mistake. A replica in a high-traffic area was poor judgment. That debt is forgiven. Lila stood as well, struggling to conceal the wave of relief washing over her. Thank you, Mr. Moretti. Don't thank me yet. You haven't survived your first day. He strode to the door, pulling it open. Claire will send the employment contracts. Read everything. Don't sign until you're sure. Claire? My receptionist, the one whose name you wanted. Right. Layla bent to gather her scattered papers, fighting for some shred of dignity while on her hands and knees. She managed to wrestle everything into the portfolio, its compromised zipper forcing a 2-handed grip to keep her life from spilling out. As she reached the threshold, Dante's voice cut the air. Ms. Bennett, she pivoted. It was not your qualifications or your evident desperation that secured your position, he stated. It was your decision to report the Moretti fraud, knowing it guaranteed your own ruin. Few possess that kind of resolve. I demand a subject who does. Words failed Layla, so she offered a silent, sharp nod, and then she was gone. The weekend passed in a blur of focused anxiety, a time of meticulous armoring. Layla purchased new shoes, severe professional heels that did not pinch, and 2 more dresses, both devoid of any visible imperfection. She parsed the non-disclosure agreement Claire had sent, all 47 pages of it, and affixed her signature. Dante's analysis had been flawless. Her desperation for the role far outstripped any need for legal sanctuary. Monday arrived under a shroud of rain. At 7:45, Layla stood beneath Moretti Tower, her umbrella having already surrendered once to the wind, the structure looming over her like a testament to absolute power. Inside, the lobby was a cold expanse of marble and steel, manned by guards who examined her ID with the gravity of men protecting state secrets. She stepped onto the 47th floor at 7:58. Claire was at her post, wearing the same unforgiving expression from their interview. Her eyes flicked from Layla to the clock on her screen. You are early. I was under the impression that early was considered punctual here. Early is tolerated. Punctual is mandatory. Late is fatal. Claire slid a key card and a thin manila file across the desk. Your station is the alcove bordering Mr. Moretti's office. You are cleared for this floor, the executive suite on 46, and the records vault on 42. Any other location requires his written authorization. Your system login is inside the file. Change the password immediately. Mr. Morelli is expected at 800 hours. He will want coffee, black, unsweetened, between 180 and 185 degrees, on his desk by 8:01. Not 800, not 8:02. How do I? Claire gestured toward a door marked Executive Break Room. There is a thermometer in the drawer by the espresso machine. Use it. Subject Lila, clutching the file and card, entered the designated break area, less a room than a shrine to immaculate high-performance machinery. The coffee maker looked as if it were designed for off-world use. Locating a digital thermometer, she brewed the coffee, verified its temperature with a surgeon's focus, and placed it on Dante's desk as the clock struck 1 minute past 8. The office was empty. Lila set the cup down with deliberate care, avoiding the perimeter of what looked like priceless artifacts, then retreated to her post. The alcove, while small, was an exercise in ergonomic perfection. Her monitor faced a panoramic view of the city, a vista that surely cost a fortune. A terminal, a phone of baffling complexity, and a stack of files labeled urgent awaited her. Lila initiated her work, penetrating the system to inspect the first document. It was a cargo manifest from a Morelli subsidiary, appearing to be standard logistical information. Yet, when cross-referenced against the company's asset ledger, a small inconsistency surfaced. A shipment of textiles slated for 500 units had been logged at 487. The discrepancy was noted but unexplained. Lila pulled a second manifest. The same division, a different quarter, and another small shortfall of 13 units. She began to map the emerging pattern. A voice sliced through her concentration. "You've been here for 20 minutes, and you're already hunting for pathologies." The subject flinched. Dante stood framed in his doorway, holding the coffee she had made. His expression was not one of amusement, but of cool, clinical appraisal. "I was simply reviewing the files you marked as priority," Lila said. "Those files are 6 months old. They are not a priority. They are an assessment." He sipped the coffee. 184 degrees acceptable. "Did you measure it?" "I measure everything." He crossed to her desk, his eyes on her screen. "Your diagnosis?" "Minor inventory deficits across all shipments from Arcadia Textiles. Individually negligible, but consistently present. The cause is either a systemic glitch or deliberate theft. Which do you believe it is?" "A random system failure would produce random results. This pattern has a rhythm. Someone is bleeding small amounts of inventory, betting the minor losses will be ignored as statistical noise." Dante set his cup on the corner of her desk. "What is the total financial loss?" Lila produced her quick calculation. "Over a 6-month period, roughly $32,000 in assets at wholesale value. And the thief?" "Isolating the individual requires access to personnel records and shipping schedules. The profile would be a warehouse employee with authorization to amend inventory logs." "You have been in that chair for 20 minutes, Dante noted, his voice quiet. "My last assistant failed to see this pattern after 6 months with the same information. Perhaps your last assistant wasn't trained to search for inconsistencies. She was instructed to do precisely that." He collected his coffee. "The difference is competence. She did not have it. You do." The subject felt a flush of pride, instantly chilled by a wave of suspicion. "You knew about this already." "I have known for 8 months. This was a test to gauge your analytical speed." "That is—" Lila stopped herself from saying a word that would end her employment. "That is exceptionally thorough. I do not employ personnel I have not tested, nor do I grant trust that has not been earned." He started toward his office, then paused. "Solve the Arcadia problem quietly. The perpetrator is not to know he has been discovered until I decide his fate. What course of action do you—" "Your mind was sharp enough to find the disease. It should be sharp enough to prescribe the treatment." He was gone, the door closing with a soft click. Lila stared at the closed door before turning back to her screen. She pulled personnel records, shipping logs, and warehouse access data. 3 hours of cross-referencing and timeline reconstruction produced a name: Marcus Renton, a warehouse supervisor, 6 years with the company, full clearance for the inventory system. The subject's method was to adjust shipment tallies after the trucks were loaded, but before the final report was filed, a technique that buried the theft in the data. Lila drafted a brief summary, attached the supporting evidence, and left it on Dante's desk while he was out. When he returned, he read it without a word, then beckoned her inside. "How certain are you?" "Short of an exquisitely crafted frame-up, the data is conclusive. Recommend a course of action." Lila hesitated. "Terminate his employment and report him to the authorities? On what grounds?" "He is stealing from you. He has stolen $32,000 across 6 months, roughly $5,000 a month. Do you have any idea what I spend on coffee for this office each month? I would assume it is more than $5,000. Considerably so. I ask again, why does this matter?" Lila recalibrated. "Because the loss isn't financial. It is a contagion. To allow it to go unpunished is to invite it to spread." "Better?" Dante leaned back in his chair. "Elaborate. If he's selling the inventory, he has an outside partner. That signifies a breach in your supply chain that could be exploited for something far more damaging than textiles. The correct diagnosis." Dante stood. "Marcus Renton means nothing to me. The systemic vulnerability that allowed him to operate for 8 months without detection, however, is my primary concern. Fix the system. My proposal? Institute a 3-point verification protocol, random cargo audits, and a 2-person sign-off for any manifest alterations. Engineer the process so that honesty is easier than deceit." He walked to the window. "Then you will terminate Renton. No authorities, no spectacle. I will handle the rest." A cold dread washed over the subject. What does handle the rest mean? Dante turned from the window to face her. "It means you will not ask questions to which you do not truly want the answers." She thought to argue, then remembered the desperation that brought her here. "My purpose is to serve you. I will begin deploying the new protocols immediately," she said. "Excellent." He went back to his desk. "And Ms. Bennett, yes? Do not waste a single thought on Marcus Renton. I can assure you he is about to stop being a problem." Lila left, returned to her desk, and fought to silence the speculation screaming in her mind. The following weeks fell into a grim cadence, a metronome swinging between high performance and a deep, humming anxiety. Lila would materialize at 7:55, brewing Dante's coffee to a precise temperature. Her assignments were a cruel tapestry, weaving mundane clerical work with arcane financial dissections engineered to shatter her emotional and intellectual limits. Dante's standards were surgical, unforgiving. He didn't want tasks done. He demanded flawless execution within crucibles of his own design, forcing her to source missing data or intuit his unarticulated hypotheses, then chastising her failure to read his mind. Yet there were moments, slivers of light, when he would study her work and grant a curt nod. A gesture she learned was his version of effusive praise. Sometimes he asked for her professional judgment and seemed to truly consider her answer. On occasion, she would catch him observing her, with an expression that was neither approval nor censure. The office itself felt like a vacuum. People moved with a spectral caution, whispering, avoiding eye contact in the elevators. She'd collected fragments of stories about Dante, from the plausible to the mythic, one claiming he was a titan forged in his own fire. Another whispered he was heir to a legacy left by a father who was even more ruthless. The only certainty was that to cross him was to commit professional suicide, though far darker fates were often rumored. Lila walled off these stories, focusing on her own competence as a shield. She sealed cracks in the system, streamlined procedures, and diffused crises before they could detonate. She began to anticipate his needs, reading the weather of his moods in the barest flicker of an eye, navigating his structured chaos. Then, in her 6th week, she found something not meant for her. It was nearly 8 p.m. The floor was a ghost town, but Dante was still in a meeting, leaving Lila to sift through a series of flagged expense reports. The entries were unremarkable: travel, entertainment, acquisitions. But a single line item felt dissonant. A company, Meridian Holdings, had billed $127,000 for consulting fees. This alone wasn't strange, but when Lila pulled Meridian's payment history to verify, a shadow fell across the data. The money was routed to a firm called Apex Advisory Group, an entity so new or so small it didn't exist in any corporate database. A deeper search returned nothing. Apex Advisory Group was a phantom without a legal charter, tax filings, or any corporate shadow. It simply wasn't real. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was either a clerical error or a sign of a profound sickness in the books. She pulled more records from Meridian. 3 other payments to Apex appeared over the last 6 months, each between $100,000 and $150,000. More than $500,000 vanished into a non-existent company. The rest of Meridian's ledger was pristine. These 4 transactions were bleeding wounds on an otherwise flawless record. Lila stared, frozen, at the screen. Layla saw the pathology in the system with stark clarity. The money siphoned through Meridian pointed to a rogue element within the company or a far deeper institutional rot. If Dante, the Alpha, was involved, then her knowledge was a death sentence. Logic screamed for her to retreat, but a compulsion drove her to dig further. She began dissecting Meridian's shipping manifests, a logistics arm of the company. A pattern of decay emerged as she matched invoices to cargo logs, faked inventories, nonsensical shipping lanes, and warehouses that were listed as dormant yet clearly active. The simple diagnosis of fraud felt utterly inadequate. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. Her boss, Dante, appeared in the doorway, a weariness clinging to him that she had never seen before. His question, "Find anything interesting?" was the fulcrum on which her future would turn. This moment would define everything between them. A lie was survival, but the truth was a scalpel that might reveal the real man beneath the armor. Layla chose the scalpel, turning her monitor to face him, the damning evidence glowing in the dim light. She laid out the facts with clinical precision. Meridian Holdings has made payments to a ghost entity, more than $500,000 over 6 months. I can't trace where the money went without direct banking access. Dante moved to her desk, his expression a mask as he scanned the data. "And what do you surmise?" His voice was unnervingly calm. "I assess it's either internal theft or money laundering," Layla replied. "Or it's a sanctioned operation, and I'm a complication you didn't foresee." A long silence stretched between them before Dante reached out and closed the file. "Go home, Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone not threatening, but wound tight with control. "We will discuss this tomorrow." Securing her work, Layla walked out, feeling his gaze on her back even after his office door clicked shut. Sleep was a stranger that night. She returned at 7:30 the next morning, expecting the corporate guillotine. Her keycard denied, her access revoked. Instead, the building greeted her with a chilling normalcy. The elevator climbed to the 47th floor. Her computer logged her in without protest. A blade of light shone from under Dante's door. She prepared his coffee, a morning sacrament, checking the temperature twice before knocking at precisely 8:01. "Come in." Dante was a silhouette against the window, seemingly lost in contemplation of the city sprawling below. He didn't move. "Leave it on the desk," he said. As Lila turned to retreat, his voice cracked like a whip. "Stay." She froze, every nerve ending screaming. Dante turned from the window, the exhaustion etched on his face only sharpening the dangerous edge of his presence. "Deliver your report," he commanded. Layla recited the information, her voice a detached echo of the previous night. Irregular payments to a shell company via Meridian totaling over $500,000 in 6 months. Discrepancies in logistics suggest warehouse misuse. My conclusion is that either you are directing this unsanctioned operation or you are unaware of it. If it is the former, I need to understand my role. Dante walked to his desk, took a sip of the coffee, and set the cup down with deliberate care. The very air in the room felt weaponized, every object an extension of his will. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the same chair from her first interview. "What do you know about my family?" Dante asked. "Your father established Morelli Enterprises 30 years ago. He died 8 years ago, and you took control, spearheading a major expansion." "My father didn't start a business," Dante corrected her, his voice flat, devoid of feeling. "He inherited a kingdom." "My grandfather built something that made men fear him. My father was merely his successor. When my father died, the legacy fell to my brother and me." A chill crept over her skin. "What operations?" "You are intelligent enough to connect the dots. I won't draw you a picture." "Your family is in organized crime." "Is," Dante confirmed, his gaze unwavering. Present tense. "We are, however, in transition. Some of our ventures are legitimate. Others are being cleansed. Meridian, unfortunately, still serves its original purpose." "You're laundering money." "I'm managing an inheritance of sin. There's a difference." He toyed with a pen, a small, controlled motion. "After my father's death, there were 2 paths. Let the entire edifice collapse in on itself, or seize the reins and try to build something legitimate to protect the people who depend on me. I chose to build." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your discovery has made you one of 2 things, a liability or an asset. I'm giving you the chance to decide which you'd rather be." Her mouth turned to dust. "And if I choose to walk away?" "You'll sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Take a generous severance, and you will never work in this city again. You'll be branded a security risk." "That's not a choice." "No," Dante agreed. "It is not. But it is a courtesy you would not have received from my predecessors." Layla looked at the man who had given her a purpose when she felt invisible. He was offering her a position in a world that could devour her whole, or a chance to be pivotal in a dangerous, illicit, and monumental transformation. "What would my role be?" she heard herself ask. A flicker in Dante's eyes, not of relief, but something dangerously close to it. "What you're doing now, but on a grander scale. You will find the sickness in this system and you will help me engineer the cure. You will help me legitimize this enterprise before the rot at its core consumes us all." "That's far beyond the scope of an administrative assistant." "You've been my forensic accountant and operational analyst from your first day. I simply never gave you the title." "And things like Meridian?" "You bring them to me." only me. And together, we find a way to excise the tumor without killing the patient. I will be honest with you about what this company is, but your soul will be your own. Listen, you need to decide if you're in. Layla recalled past moments where doing the right thing led to disaster. At 27, she weighed her stagnant career against this enormous risk. I need full access to every financial record, she stated firmly. Not just the clean files. To fix this system, I have to see the entire sickness. Done. And I need your word that going legitimate is the real goal, not just a cover to hide evidence. Dante stood and rounded the desk, holding out his hand. You have my word. In my world, that is a binding contract. Layla shook it. The grip was firm and held a moment too long, sealing a deal that felt like more than just business. Welcome to the inner circle, Ms. Bennett, he said. Try to minimize the collateral. In the weeks that followed, Layla learned Dante's world was a much more tangled web than she first thought. She was given access to encrypted networks and ledgers, detailing an organization in a slow, painful metamorphosis. Some of the companies were completely above board, operating just as advertised. Others were in transition, their income rerouted, partnerships ended, and organizations remade. And then there were places like Meridian. Layla's days were a maze of tracing money, deciding what to save and what to dissolve. It felt like untangling a massive knot while someone kept adding more string, each tug revealing a new problem. Surprisingly, Dante was with her for much of it. She'd assumed he would command from his office while she handled the dirty work. Instead, he sat at her desk, examining files with her, breaking down problems like a colleague, not a superior. This Brooklyn warehouse, Layla said one afternoon, tapping a file on her screen. It's listed as a Meridian storage location, but the utility usage is wrong. It's pulling way too much power for a simple warehouse. Dante leaned closer to look. He was near enough that she smelled his cologne, a subtle, expensive scent with a French name she wouldn't try to say. What do you think it's being used for? He asked. Either they have machinery off the books, or it's been converted for something power-hungry, maybe a grow operation or some kind of factory. Neither. It is a casino, poker, sports betting, with some loan sharking. Dante sat back. My uncle's business. He has run it for 20 years. Your uncle? My father's brother. He has no desire to go legitimate, and he has enough power in the family that removing him would start a war I cannot afford right now. Layla brought up more files. What is the annual profit from this place? About 2 million, almost none of it reported. And you are letting it continue? I'm choosing my battles. The gambling den is small enough to avoid federal attention. My uncle keeps it contained, does not expand, and is not greedy. It is a risk, but a manageable one. I have bigger problems to solve first. Such as... Dante got up and walked to the window, a habit he had when thinking, as if the city helped him order his thoughts. Such as my father making deals with men who do not care that he's gone. Or suppliers who push me to move products I want to stop handling. Or the fact that ending certain deals would put such a target on my back that running a clean business would become impossible. What kind of products? He turned to her. Are you sure you wish to know? Layla thought about it. Yes. Mostly stolen goods, high-end electronics, jewels, fine art, things that arrive at the port and disappear before customs logs them. My father built relationships with the thieves, and they expect the business to continue. Is it? For now, I have been slowly reducing our part, buying less, moving less, creating distance, but it is a delicate and dangerous process. These are not people who respond well to being cut off. Layla turned back to her screen, opening manifests. Show me the operations. I will see if I can find a way to make the decline look like a result of market forces. Make it seem driven by business, not my decision. Dante returned to her desk, and for the next 2 hours, he walked her through the illegal side of his enterprise. He spoke factually, without shame or excuses, simply explaining the reality he was given and was now trying to dismantle. When he was done, Layla's head ached, and she finally grasped why he had appeared so weary when she first told him about Meridian's problems. This will take years, she said. I am aware, and there is no guarantee it will work. Any of these alliances could fall apart and bring everything crashing down. I know that too. Dante looked at her. Does this change your mind? About helping you? Layla shook her head. No, but our strategy must be smarter. We have to speed up in some areas and slow down in others. We need to set priorities based on risk, not profit. What would be on your priority list? Layla opened a new spreadsheet and began building a plan. First, any business that involves violence or exploitation gets shut down. I do not care what it earns. We cannot be legitimate while profiting from suffering. Second are ventures that have police attention. They are ticking time bombs. Third, high-risk, low-profit operations not worth the potential fallout. Everything else will be phased out slowly, replaced by legitimate businesses as we move forward. Dante watched her as she worked, and when she looked up, his face was unreadable. What? She asked. You have just entered the world of organized crime, and your first move is to draft an ethical deconstruction plan. You told me you wanted to be legitimate. That requires principles. Most people in your situation would be looking for a way to profit from this. I am not most people. Layla saved the document, and if I wanted to profit from illegal work, I never would have reported the fraud at Morrison. No, Dante agreed quietly. You would not have. He left her office, but the next morning, Layla discovered her salary had increased by $30,000, and her new title was Director of Financial Operations. The work consumed her like nothing had since her first years at Morrison. She was solving puzzles where the stakes were real, working for a man who treated her like a partner, not an underling. The hours were grueling. 12 to 14-hour days were the new standard, but she never complained. She was in her element. This was her purpose. And Dante, despite his controlled and private nature, was becoming something more than an employer. She noticed it in small things, like the coffee he brought her when he knew she had been staring at figures for too long, or how he would ask for her opinion on things outside of work. Books, music, the hype about a new restaurant on Fifth Avenue, or how he would occasionally just sit in her office, working in silence, as if her presence was a comfort. She saw it in his eyes when he thought she was not looking, a glance that mixed curiosity with something that felt like concern. 3 months in, Layla was working late on a difficult shipping route analysis when Dante appeared at her door with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey that cost more than her first car. It is time for a break, he said. I am almost done with this. You have been almost done for 3 hours. It is time. Layla saved her file and accepted the glass. The whiskey was smooth and warm, with a hint of smoke and honey. What are we drinking to? she asked. To progress, we closed down the first top priority target today, the port-import operation. That was not planned until next month. I moved it up. You were right, the risk was too high. Dante took the chair across from her desk. The parties involved were not pleased, but they will adjust. How not pleased? Not pleased enough that I have given you a security detail for the next 2 weeks. Lila set her glass down. I am sorry. The people we just stopped know you are the analyst who identified them as a risk. They will not do anything reckless, but I will not bet on your safety. Did you not think to discuss this with me first? I am discussing it with you now. After it is already done. Correct. Dante drank from his glass. Because if I had asked, you would have said you did not need protection. I would have disagreed, and we would have wasted time on an argument that ends with me doing this anyway. That is, Layla stopped because he was right, and they both knew. I do not like being treated as though I am helpless. I am treating you as though you are essential to this company, and I cannot afford to lose you. There is a difference. Is there? Dante leaned forward. I have had 4 executive assistants in 2 years. 3 quit, unable to handle the job, and 1 tried to steal from me. You have been here 3 months and found problems that have been hurting this organization for years. You have created plans my own finance team could not imagine. You have challenged my decisions and have been correct more often than not. So yes, there is a difference. I need you here, which means I need you unharmed. Layla picked up her glass again, needing to occupy her hands. I appreciate the gesture, but I still prefer to be included in these decisions. Duly noted. A corner of Dante's mouth lifted, the closest he ever really came to a full smile. I'll try to remember that should you find your life in danger. See that you do. A functional silence settled between them, a space filled by the taste of expensive spirits as they surveyed the city from her office. May I ask something? Layla ventured. That would depend on the question. You mentioned a brother was meant to share this enterprise. What happened to him? The muscles in his face went taut. He's gone. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. He was killed 5 years ago, a casualty of a turf war with another crew. Dante's gaze fell to his glass. He was supposed to run the legitimate side. He had a gift for people, for deals, for building alliances that didn't rely on fear. My role was the other side of the coin, the muscle, the operations, the things that required a man who could make hard choices without flinching. But his death left you with both halves. His death meant I inherited a kingdom I was only 50% equipped to rule. The part that bleeds, I understood. The part that builds instead of just holds, that was his skill, not mine. Layla absorbed this. She pictured him, Dante, a man of such meticulous control and precision, trying to construct a legitimate world with the tools of a violent one. You're doing better than you think, she told him. Am I? You hired me. You're bringing in analysis instead of just making decisions based on power and threat. You're shutting down the parts that cause harm, even when they're profitable. That isn't a man failing to build something clean. It's a man who's truly trying. Dante watched her for a long, quiet moment. You have more faith in me than I do. Then I'm here to be the balance. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Just for a second, Then his phone vibrated, shattering the fragile peace. He glanced at the screen, and the information there wiped his expression clean, leaving only granite. "I have to go," he said, standing. "Don't stay too late." "Where are you going?" "To see someone who's unhappy with our recent changes in operation." He set his glass on her desk. "My security team will be downstairs when you leave. Don't try to lose them." The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. Lila lied, a falsehood they both acknowledged. After he was gone, she stayed, finished her whiskey, and tried not to dwell on him walking into danger while she sat safely in a tower of glass. The next morning, he arrived at the office with scraped knuckles and no comment. Lila didn't ask, but she noticed the stiff way he moved, how he favored his left hand over his right to lift a coffee cup, the slight swelling along his jaw. She also felt a new current in the office chatter. The fear had always been there, but now it was different. It was reverent, as if some unspoken challenge to the hierarchy had been brutally answered. "What happened last night?" she asked Claire while Dante was in a meeting. Mr. Morelli issued a reminder about why you don't test his patience, Claire said, her eyes fixed on her screen. "That's all you need to know." "Was anyone hurt badly?" "Define badly." "Claire." The older woman finally looked up, a sliver of pity in her eyes. "You're starting to care about him. That's a mistake." "I'm not." "You are. I've seen 4 other assistants in this chair. The first 3 were terrified of him. The 4th thought she could control him. You're the first one who sees a man." Claire's voice was a low warning. "He is a man, but he's also a monster. Never forget which one carries more weight around here." Layla went back to her desk, trying to work, but Claire's words echoed. That evening, after most had gone home, Dante called her into his office. "We need to discuss Meridian," he said. Layla sat. "What's the problem?" "I'm shutting it down, all of it. The entire operation is too exposed for too little legitimate gain. Its assets will be liquidated and folded into the cleaner parts of the business. That's going to leave a hole in your distribution network. I'll fill it with clean contracts. It will take longer, but it's a better path than trying to sanitize Meridian piece by piece." "And the timeline?" "End of the month. That gives you 3 weeks to map out a redistribution of its legitimate functions and cut every other tie." "Buddy." He slid a folder across the polished wood. "Everything you need is in here. Employee files, vendor deals, leases. Your job is to find a way to end them all without triggering a lawsuit or a war." Layla opened it, the first page revealing a tangled mess of handshake deals and shadow agreements that would be a nightmare to unravel cleanly. "This is more than a 3-week job," she stated. "I know. Do what you can. I'll handle the rest." "When you say you'll handle the rest," "I mean I'll handle it in ways you don't need to know about." Dante's tone was iron. "I know you want to be involved in everything, but some doors in this business are closed to you for your own protection and for mine." Layla felt the argument rise in her throat, but saw in his face it was useless. The decision was final, and like most of his decisions, it was absolute. "Understood," she said. "But if this goes sideways because I didn't have all the facts, that's on you." "Noted." She took the file, and for the next 2 weeks she lived inside the problem of dismantling Meridian. Some were easy, like leases with clear exit clauses or vendor contracts that could be bought out. Others took invention, finding technical breaches, offering settlements just large enough to avoid court, and creating paper trails that looked solid on the surface. She worked deep into the night, often until the cleaning crews arrived. Dante was usually there too, sometimes appearing in her doorway around 9 or 10 with food, and they would work on in a quiet, shared orbit. On the night before the Meridian shutdown was set to finalize, Dante appeared at her door, looking more strained than she had ever seen him. "We have a problem," he said. A cold knot of dread formed in Lila's stomach. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where someone found out about the Meridian closure ahead of schedule and decided to make a move." He walked toward her desk. "I need you to go home. Right now." "What's happening?" "Nothing you need to be a part of. Go home, lock your doors, and don't answer any number you don't recognize." "Dante!" "This isn't a discussion, Lila." Hearing her first name from him was so rare it felt like a siren. "Some people are very unhappy about the changes we're making, and they've chosen tonight to voice their objections. I need you somewhere safe while I deal with it. I can help. You can't. Not with this." He pulled out his phone, typing a fast message. "Security is downstairs. They'll take you home and we'll sit on your building until I give the word." "How long will that be?" "As long as it takes." He met her eyes, and for a split second she saw something that looked like fear, a sight so alien it terrified her more than anything. "Please, for once, just do as I ask without a fight." Layla gathered her things and let security drive her home. Sleep was impossible. She sat on her sofa, phone clutched in her hand, waiting for a call that never came. At 2 a.m, she was still wide awake, staring at the dark screen, fighting off the worst possible images. At 2:47, it rang. An unknown number. She answered. "Miss Bennett." The voice was male, a stranger with an accent she couldn't place. "Your work has been causing problems for some very important people." "Who is this?" "Someone who thinks you should reconsider your choice of employer. Mr. Morelli's plans are upsetting a very delicate balance. Your help makes you part of the problem." Layla's hand tightened on the phone. "If you have an issue with what we're doing, take it up with Dante." "Oh, we are. Right now, as a matter of fact. We just wanted you to understand that your involvement has consequences. Ask yourself if your job is worth what it might cost you." The line went dead. Layla sat frozen for a heartbeat before dialing Dante. It went straight to his voicemail. She tried again, same result. She called the security team meant to be outside. The phone rang and rang with no answer. Grabbing her keys and phone, she ran. The warehouse was in a part of the city that progress had forgotten. Shattered roads, rusting chain-link fences, and the hollow, broken eyes of abandoned buildings. Layla sat in the passenger seat of Dante's car, a black sedan that radiated more menace than any sports car, and tried to control her breathing. "This is a tactical mistake," she said, for the third time since they had left her office. Dante offered a clipped nod, his gaze already consuming the derelict 3-story structure ahead. 3 hours earlier, the confrontation was a mere formality of his control. He came to his subordinate Lila with a conclusion, rendering any discussion hollow. The trip to the Meridian warehouse was presented as an unavoidable fate. Her surrender was a calculated masterpiece built upon her terror of the unknown, a classic symptom of a freshly forged trauma bond. The location's likeness to a cinematic slaughterhouse sparked a visceral anxiety in Lila, forcing her to reconsider her obedience. She pleaded for understanding. Dante's reply was a single, hollow word. He then laid down a liturgy of dependence. Keep close, be silent, and vanish at the first sign of a threat. His sharp repetition of the escape command hammered the power dynamic into place. Lila's compliance, an instinct born of the menacing atmosphere, was expected. Dante entered the building with unnerving grace. Inside, the warehouse was a tomb of decay and disuse. The sickly, jaundiced light from above made every footstep echo like a portent. A man, Gerald, started at the unannounced arrival of Mr. Morelli. Dante's voice was warm, a stark contrast that sent a tremor of dread through Lila. He introduced his assistant, casually mentioning her role in forensic accounting. Gerald's smile was a brittle mask, failing to hide the panic in his eyes. The accountant, Bennett, had unearthed phantoms in the ledgers, all leading to a shell company named Apex Advisory. When questioned, Gerald acknowledged the name, dismissing it as a logistics consultant. Dante let the lie hang in the air before revealing Apex Advisory was pure fiction, leaving two devastating truths. Payments were made to a ghost, or money was being washed. The blood drained from Gerald's face, a visible fracture in his composure as his words failed him. Dante then delivered his terms, demanding a full confession about the money's path and the warehouse's secret life. As Gerald faltered, Dante's hand struck the desk, a sudden crack of violence that made both Gerald and Lila flinch. The man fell silent. Dante revealed he had known of the fraud for some time. The interrogation was now only about finding the puppeteer. Under the weight of this pressure, Gerald's will disintegrated. The confession spilled out, painting Victor Raines as the architect who had made contact 6 months ago. The deal was simple. Move a forbidden product through the network for a 20% cut of the profits. Gerald swore ignorance of the cargo, merely following orders on where to ship and where to send the payments. Dante's face remained a stone mask, but the silent repetition of Victor Raines's name was a seismic event in his mind, connecting this betrayal to an older war. A tremor took hold of Gerald's hands as he navigated the computer files, his body betraying his terror. The screen showed 3 addresses in the Port District, which he weakly claimed were just for temporary holding. Dante watched the screen, his jaw tightening into a knot of fury as he recognized them as family homes. Gerald could only admit his oversight was a grave mistake. Dante confirmed 23 unsanctioned shipments had passed through. He then ordered Lila to capture every detail on the screen with her phone. While Layla's phone became the silent witness, a terrified Gerald asked what would become of him. Dante laid out the stark reality: confess every conspirator, then resign and disappear forever. The alternative, he explained, was being left to Victor Raines, a fate Dante clinically described as a guaranteed execution. He was weaponizing Raines's brutal reputation to achieve his own ends. Gerald's complexion turned from bone white to the color of ash. Gerald whispered his fear of being killed, and Dante confirmed it with the cold detachment of a surgeon. The resignation he framed was the only path to survival, giving him a deadline of the next morning. Once Lila had her evidence, they departed. In the car's suffocating silence, Lila finally asked about Victor Raines. Dante described him not as a man, but as a problem, a former tool that had turned against its master, his voice devoid of any emotion. Dante elaborated, painting Raines as a fool who believed he could poison Dante's empire without consequence. When Lila guessed the business was narcotics, Dante broadened the grim canvas to weapons, or even human lives, noting Victor's only specialty was profit. The leather of the steering wheel groaned under the tension in Dante's grip. He framed the issue as one of pure liability. If the authorities found the shipments, the legal guillotine would fall on his neck. The idea of calling the police was met with Dante's sharp, contemptuous dismissal. His reasoning exposed a deep-seated narcissism, a refusal to be judged by any power but his own. He spoke of owner liability, the legal snare Victor was using as a shield. If Victor fell, he would drag Dante down with him. Lila's question about their next step was her final surrender to his world. Dante's answer was a promise of proactive, lethal intervention. Dante's quiet question, how? Was the moment Miss Bennet was conscripted from observer to accomplice. Back in the office, past 11, Dante poured a whiskey, the amber liquid a familiar rite of self-control. He offered a glass to Lila. She refused. He didn't press, instead gesturing for her to project the captured evidence onto the screen. The inquest began, the addresses from her phone glowing like wounds as Dante watched. Dante instantly recognized the port locations as breakdown points, where bulk shipments were dissected for street-level distribution. The residential addresses, he surmised, were a cloak of normalcy, preying on neighbors too terrified to speak. He tried to draw a line, stating he would handle the next steps while she was to stand down. Lila's immediate protest was the first tremor of her rebellion against his control. Dante escalated, painting a portrait of Victor Reigns as a monster of intellect, precision, and cruelty, a psychological assault designed to terrify her into obedience. He claimed to have men for such work, dismissing her as if she were a child. His smile was no longer a mask. It was a glimpse of the predator beneath, genuinely dangerous. He threw down a gauntlet, questioning if her soul could withstand the kind of violence that was coming. Dante began a cold psychological evaluation, questioning Lila's capacity to exist where violence was the grammar of daily life. He spoke of the dissolving lines between law and sin in their world. A tremor ran through Lila. She asked for clarity. He drew the boundary for her, defining her value as analytical, not tactical, before ordering her to walk away. Her quiet question about his intentions was met with a chillingly ambiguous promise. Lila's response was a declaration of war between her conscience and his command. He declared his methods were his own affair. Her complicity, he insisted, ended with her report. She was now absolved and dismissed. He then laid a trap, an ultimatum about calling the authorities to test the strength of her leash. For 2 months she had studied his perfect control, and now she understood his command was an order to save herself from the coming storm. She promised not to report him. He repeated his order. Her obedience was a lie. She went to an apartment, changed into shadows, and drove toward the address, a place that looked exactly as she had pictured it. The building was a 4-story carcass, scarred with the ghosts of previous break-ins. She began her vigil. An hour of silence was broken by the arrival of a van. 2 men emerged, moving with a practiced rhythm as they offloaded several mid-sized containers into the building's maw. Lila's camera drank in the scene, capturing their faces and the vehicle's license plate. After 20 minutes, the van departed, leaving the street to its dead quiet once more. Lila found herself at a crossroads, weighing the sanity of reporting what she knew against the madness of continuing her rogue inquiry. The logical path was clear. She chose the other. The building's side entrance was sealed, but the front door was a broken promise. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of neglect and scavenged life. She took the stairs, spurning the dead elevator. On the 2nd floor, the faint sounds of life from behind closed doors offered a deceptive blanket of normalcy. She ascended to the third floor, a void that smelled of decay and dampness. Her movements were a study in practiced silence. A new high-security lock distinguished apartment 3F. Listening at the door yielded nothing but an oppressive quiet. Just as she turned to leave, the door opened, revealing a hulking man whose face was a testament to a life of violence. His eyes narrowed, instantly marking her as out of place. Lila offered a rehearsed story, a search for a friend named Sarah. He challenged the lie, his voice a low growl before coldly stating that no Sarah lived there. As the brute advanced, a primal scream for escape erupted in Layla's mind. A second, younger man materialized, blocking her path and flashing a knife with practiced ease. He asked a question she didn't hear. Her words of de-escalation were useless. The first man's hand clamped around her arm like a vice. He ordered her inside. Her struggle was met with crushing force until numbness consumed her limb. Defeated, she was thrown into the abyss of apartment 3F, her cry for help dying in her throat. The apartment was a shell populated by stacks of boxes from the van. Her main captor began his interrogation, demanding to know who she worked for. Her denials earned her a stunning blow to the face that sent the room spinning. Her phone clattered to the floor and was snatched up by the younger man who found the photos. The question was asked again, her thoughts fractured, racing through desperate scenarios, knowing the claim of working alone was an unbelievable fiction. Knowing a police connection meant certain death, she gambled with her final card. Dante Morelli. The name hung in the air, a spell that froze them both in place. He demanded she confirm it. She did, weaving a lie about a scheduled check-in, a desperate survival gambit. After a silent, tense exchange, the leader made a call, his words clipped and urgent. Someone from Morelli's team with pictures, claiming he knows where she is. He ended the call and informed Layla she was now a prisoner. Her plea for freedom was met with silence. He shoved her toward a chair, telling her the only thing keeping her breathing was her value to her boss. For 20 minutes, she sat under heavy guard. Then a third man arrived, a figure of such cold professionalism he made the others seem like thugs. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with an unnervingly placid face devoid of emotion. The man's suit whispered of immense wealth. It had to be Victor Rains. Victor's voice, smooth and cultured, was a jarring note in the squalid room. He called her a minor inconvenience. She offered a desperate apology for her freedom, a proposal he dismissed as naive. To him, she was either a problem to be disposed of or an opportunity to be exploited. He would decide which. Layla tried to fade, to become nothing more than a simple assistant. Victor scoffed at her attempt, noting that Dante Morelli only collects valuable assets. He demanded to know her purpose. A cold sweat traced her skin as she admitted her skill in data analysis. Victor confirmed she was the one who found the Apex advisory transfers, a truth that she knew had exposed her to Dante. He then inquired about Dante's mood. Hearing of his rage, Victor painted his rival's desire for legitimacy as a pathetic weakness. A small smile touched Victor's lips, more terrifying than his mask of indifference. He asked what she knew of their shared past, then began weaving his own version of their story. He was the true architect he claimed, who had saved Dante's failing empire and forged their power, for which he had been promised half the throne. Layla knew, without asking, that the partnership was broken. Victor sneered that Dante's stupid choice to go legitimate was the reason, a cowardly denial of the blood their kingdom was built upon. Layla's face remained a careful blank. She asked him what he wanted. His goal, he said, was to shatter Dante's facade, to show the world the hypocrite whose empire rested on fear and bone, mentioning forgotten bodies and the death of Marco Morelli. After planting these poison seeds, Victor's tone shifted. Your time here is permanent. A deep, visceral terror seized her. She argued her death would lead back to him. Victor simply laughed, explaining the vast difference between Dante's suspicion and cold, hard proof. He boasted his work would be done long before Dante could connect the dots. Victor gave the order for her confinement, adding with chilling irony, "Make her comfortable." The first captor grabbed her arm again. All resistance had been bled from her as she was led to a small dark room holding only a filthy mattress and a bucket. The bolt slammed home, sealing her in absolute darkness. Her legs gave out and she sank to the floor, trying to piece together her fractured world. Lila was now a ghost, entombed and utterly alone. Her location? A mystery. Dante believed she was safe, a fatal miscalculation, while the antagonist, Victor Reigns, saw her death as a foregone conclusion once her use as a pawn expired. Her thoughts turned inward, poisoning themselves with self-blame. A classic trauma response, blaming her own mistakes for the trap she was in. Her hands began a desperate exploration of the cell, a blind search for an escape that didn't exist. The tomb was perfect. Solid walls, a door locked from the outside, and a blacked-out window. A bucket sat in the corner, offering nothing. A second search of the darkness confirmed it held only the mattress. She fought down the rising panic, forcing her lungs to take slow, deliberate breaths. Victor's mention of a shipment was the only lifeline she had. A single event that could create a crack in her prison, one chance to rewrite her fate. Time dissolved in the sensory void. Then, sounds, muffled voices, footsteps, the scrape of crates, came before the sharp clank of the lock. Light flooded the room, a blinding shock. A silhouette filled the doorway, its voice a low command. Time to go. Lila got to her feet, her eyes straining to see past the guard. The enemy count had grown to 5, perhaps 6 men. Every one of them stared at her, their expressions cold, focused on neutralizing a threat. Her question of where received a blunt reply. The docks. Victor wants this cleaned up properly. That familiar, brutal grip locked onto her arm again, and she was hauled into the main room. The space had been wiped clean, stripped of all furniture and boxes. It was an empty, sterile stage. They forced her out into the night, into a cold air thick with the smell of salt, garbage, and the river. A car waited. It was a black sedan with tinted windows. The back door swung open, and Dante stepped out. His gaze swept over Lila, then her captor, and finally landed on Victor Reigns, who watched from the building's entrance with a look of smug satisfaction. "Let her go," Dante said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't think so." Victor sauntered forward. "You see, she's valuable now. She's proof you were watching me. Proof you broke our pact." "We have no pact, not for 3 years. So we have an understanding. My world stays separate from yours." And she crossed the line. "She's not one of my people." "She's your employee, your problem," Victor said, his smile turning feral. "So here is what happens. You walk away. You stop looking into Meridian, you stop digging into my business, and she lives. It's that simple." Dante's face was unreadable, but his stance shifted, a subtle coiling of tension. "If you hurt her, there is nowhere you can hide." A big threat for a man outnumbered 6-1. "You think I came alone?" A crack appeared in Victor's composure. He glanced past Dante, scanning the shadows for enemies he couldn't see. And in that instant, the world came apart. The first shot was a single, sharp crack from an unseen rifle. The man holding Lila spasmed and crumpled to the ground, his grip slackening. She didn't think. She ran to Dante, the only anchor in the erupting chaos. He pulled her behind him, a handgun materializing in his hand as if by magic. The sight was a violent shock to her system. The quiet man of business was now her shield against a hail of bullets, a dizzying contradiction that made her head spin. Victor's men broke and scrambled for cover as the street became a killing zone, a raw and terrifying reality utterly unlike the movies. The air was shredded by the roar of gunfire, the percussive slam of bullets into steel, and the sharp cry of shattering glass. "Stay down," Dante ordered, his voice an island of impossible calm in the storm. Lila huddled behind the sedan, trying to shrink, to disappear from the sensory assault. Figures emerged from the darkness around them, flanking Victor's men with the fluid precision of a planned attack. Victor himself had vanished behind a concrete pillar, his shouted orders swallowed by the symphony of combat. One of his men made a run for it and was cut down by a shooter she never saw. A second man crumpled, a leg shattered beneath him. Dante's pistol spoke twice, precise, deliberate cracks, and a cry tore through the air before being abruptly silenced. The sudden quiet that followed was more violent than the gunfire, leaving only a ringing in the ears and the sharp perfume of cordite. From behind the car, she watched Dante, a statue of deadly potential, weapon held low. He surveyed the scene with the detached calm of a chess master appraising the board. 4 of Victor's men were sprawled on the asphalt. 2 lay utterly still. 2 others writhed, their pain a raw, audible thing. The last 2 had thrown down their arms in surrender. Victor, somewhere in the shadows, was a silent ghost. "Show yourself!" Dante's voice cut through the stillness. "Or my people will drag you out. I promise you will prefer this." A strained moment passed before Victor emerged, hands held halfway up, his face a perfect hollow mask of calm. "Quite the performance, Dante. I see I misjudged your capacity for such violence." "A fatal error." Dante moved forward, his aim unwavering. "Kneel." "I hardly think. On your knees, Victor, or I will put you on them." A muscle leaped in Victor's jaw, but he sank down, the fabric of his expensive suit grinding into the grimy pavement. The mask shattered, revealing the pure, unvarnished hatred beneath. Dante stopped just out of reach. "You made 3 mistakes tonight. First, you thought I was ignorant of the rot you fostered within my own house. Second, you assumed I wouldn't care. Third, you believed you could threaten someone under my protection and face no reckoning. She was a spy in my operation." A calculated lie, delivered with cold certainty. "I placed her there. She was a test, meant to map the depths of your foolishness in my warehouses and to sanction what was to come." Victor's eyes narrowed into slits. "And what is that?" "That depends entirely on you." Dante nodded to one of his men, who approached Victor with zip ties. "You will give me a complete intelligence breakdown, every location, every shipment, every soul on your payroll. Then you will erase this network and disappear from this city." "You're insane if you believe—" Dante crouched, bringing his eyes level with Victor's. "Do you remember Marco?" An absolute stillness fell over Victor. "My brother." Dante's voice was a low, venomous whisper. "Gone 5 years now. The official story was a car crash. Brake failure. A tragedy." A pause, thick with menace. "Only it wasn't an accident, was it, Victor?" "I have no idea what—" "Don't!" The word was a blade. "I have spent 5 years proving what my heart already knew. You arranged Marco's death because he found the holes in your books. You feared he would bring his discovery to me. You bet on my grief clouding my judgment. The blood drained from Victor's face. Dante, you have to understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. You murdered my blood. You used my legacy to build your criminal filth. And tonight, you came for someone to whom I have a certain attachment. Dante rose to his full height. So this is the protocol. You will offer complete compliance. You will hand over every piece of data needed to sever your infrastructure. In exchange, I will give you just enough time to run before I announce your existence. No, and if I refuse? Dante worked the slide on his pistol, the sound of a round being chambered echoing in the silence. Then we skip the intervening steps and I end this now. Lila watched from the shadows, her heart hammering, as the new truth settled like a stone. Marco's death was an execution, a secret Dante had carried for half a decade. Her entire understanding of Dante Morelli fractured and reformed, the blurry outline snapping into a terrifyingly sharp focus. Victor stared up at Dante, and something inside him visibly broke. Fine. You want information, I'll give it to you, but not here. You will give it to me exactly where I choose. Dante signaled his men. Take him to the facility. Ms. Bennett and I are on our way. Two men hauled Victor up, shoving him toward a van that had just arrived. His wounded men were being loaded into another vehicle. The surrendering pair were being processed with grim efficiency. Dante turned to Lila. Are you harmed? She shook her head, words failing her. Can you walk? Yes. Sufficient. Get in the car. Lila obeyed, her body moving on autopilot as she slid into the sedan. Dante sat beside her as a stranger got behind the wheel, pulling away from the scene with the eerie calm of a routine pickup, not an escape from a gunfight. The facility? Lila managed to ask after several blocks. What is it? A sterile environment for discussion. You're going to interrogate him. That is the intent. Dante, if you hurt him, harm is a required element. Dante's eyes were like chips of stone. Victor is why Marco is dead. He has been bleeding my company dry for months, and tonight he meant to kill you. So yes, harm is the objective. You can either accept that reality or spend the rest of this ride proposing alternatives I will ignore. Layla's throat felt tight. There has to be another way. The police? The FBI? An organization that would put me under the same microscope as him? One that would dig into the foundations of every enterprise I have built? An agency that would use this to tear down my entire world? Dante's voice was level, but it had an edge like sharpened steel. I have told you before, Layla. The law doesn't protect men like me, it hunts us. Victor knew that. It's why he felt safe. Capturing him guarantees my own exposure. But if you kill him... I never said I would kill him. I said I would harm him. There is a meaningful difference. The distinction brought Layla zero comfort, but she fell silent. Arguing was pointless. She had walked into this world of her own free will. She had ignored Dante's direct order to stay away. Now she was simply a witness to the fallout. The facility was a warehouse in a part of the city that looked like it had been forgotten for decades. The inside was precisely what Layla had imagined. Bare concrete, looming steel shelves, Spartan furniture, and light that cast long, grotesque shadows. Victor was there, tied to a chair in the center of the vast space. He looked smaller, his authority stripped away, leaving only the man. Dante walked in, shrugged off his coat, and rolled up his sleeves as if preparing for hard labor. An associate handed him a folder. "This," Dante said, flipping it open, "is what I already have on your side project. 23 unauthorized shipments through Meridian in 6 months, 3 distribution points near the port, more than $600,000 funneled through shell companies. What I lack is the origin of your product, the names of your buyers, and the full scope of your network." "And you think I'll just give you that?" Victor's voice was defiant, but Lila could hear the tremor of fear beneath it. "I'm certain you will, because the other option is significantly less pleasant." Dante pulled a chair to face Victor. "Here is my offer. Your absolute cooperation, and in return, you get a 12-hour head start before I let certain other players know you've been poaching at their turf. It's enough time for you to run, to disappear, to start over somewhere new, but only after you give me everything." "And the alternative?" "In that case, I will make sure every major criminal outfit in this city knows you've been skimming their product lines while hiding behind my name. Your life expectancy will drop to 48 hours, and I will be mildly annoyed by the mess I have to clean up." Victor's face was a canvas of warring emotions: fury, calculation, terror, and finally the slow poison of defeat. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Dante leaned back. "You've watched me, Victor. You know I don't make promises I can't keep, so choose. Help me cleanly cauterize this problem, or die knowing your only legacy was making my life difficult for a few months." The silence in the warehouse grew heavy. Standing by the door, Lila felt like she'd stepped into another reality, one with a dark, primal logic she could neither grasp nor stomach. Finally, Victor broke. "The source is in Newark. It came in on container ships, manifested as textiles and machine parts. My contact there would redirect specific containers before they hit customs, and I'd arrange for them to be brought to Meridian." "Name the contact." Victor gave a name that meant nothing to Lila. Dante noted it down. "Your buyers." "Street-level dealers, mostly. People looking to move weight without dealing with the major players. I kept the deals small, frequent, hard to trace." "How many?" 30, maybe 40. I never kept a full list. It was too risky." Dante's face was unreadable. "That's a lie. A man with your meticulous nature would never operate without records. Where is the data?" Victor hesitated. "It's digital, encrypted on a remote server." "Access it?" One of Dante's men brought over a laptop. With his hands still bound, Victor awkwardly typed in a web address and a password. An encrypted file tree bloomed on the screen, a web of coded sins. Dante's gaze devoured it. "This is all of it. Every piece that matters." "Good." A subtle nod, and the data bled onto a secure drive. "And then, that was the full extent of my work within your walls." "Tell me about Marco." The color vanished from Victor's face. "Him? Who was the hand on the car? Who cut the lines?" "Dante, that was 5 years gone." "Answer the question." Victor's eyes sealed shut. "A mechanic, Taurus. He owed me. I wiped his debt for one job. He never knew the owner. He just did as he was told." "Where is he now?" "Gone. An overdose took him 2 years back." "I wasn't part of that." Silence hung heavy in the air. "Did Marco suffer?" "What?" "When the brakes gave out, in that last moment he knew he couldn't stop. Was it slow, or was it a flash?" Victor's voice was a mere whisper. "I can't say." Dante stood, paced once, then spun back, a single brutal strike sending the chair over. Victor cracked against the concrete floor. Lila gasped. Dante loomed above him, breathing in ragged bursts, the bones of his hand likely shattered. That is for Marco. For the 5 years I spent blaming myself for taking the only family I had who didn't wish for my downfall. Blood trickled from Victor's mouth, his eyes unfocused. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "No, you're sorry you were caught." Dante straightened, wincing as he flexed his mangled hand. "Get him out of my sight. Drive him to the state line and dump him. If I see his face in this city again, he's dead." 2 men lifted Victor, moving him to the door. He was a dead weight, without protest or word, a thing to be moved. When they were gone, Dante sank into the empty chair, head in his hands. Lila approached him softly. "Is your hand broken?" "I think so." "It needs to be seen." "Later." He met her gaze, and in that instant she saw him truly exhausted for the first time, utterly and completely drained. "You had no business being in that building." "I know. You could have died." "I know. But you went anyway. Why?" Layla slid into the chair opposite him. "Because you meant to handle this by yourself, and I don't know what I thought. That you'd need someone, that I could be of use." "You were of use. You saw the patterns, traced the money, gave me the leverage I needed, but you stayed and it almost cost you everything. I'm sorry." Don't be, just..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Don't ever do it again." "I won't." A minute of quiet passed between them. Then Layla finally asked the question that had haunted the edges of the confrontation. "Your brother, Marco, what was he like?" Dante's face shifted, twisting into something close to grief before he suppressed it. "He was smart, too smart for our world, but too loyal to leave. He always pushed me to go clean, to turn our father's legacy into something that wouldn't get us killed or caged. I told him he was a fool. But in the end, you did it." "After he was gone." "No, after Victor had him killed." "Yes." Because Marco was right. The empire my father built was poison to everyone it touched. Enemies, allies, family. It was only a matter of when it would finally poison me too. Dante rose, cradling his injured hand. So I began to change things, slowly, carefully, cutting away the darkest parts, building clean fronts. It took 3 years to create a business that wasn't seen as inherently corrupt. And now Victor tried to drag you back into that life. Victor never wanted me to leave. He loved the old ways, the blood, the fear, the power. When I cut him off, he took it as a deep, personal betrayal. Dante moved toward the door. "Come on, we need to get out in front of this before they find those warehouses and start asking questions." The drive back to the city was a silent, taut affair. The rising dawn, a wash of pink and gray, felt like a cruel joke against the brutal backdrop of the night. Layla felt the telltale signs of acute trauma, an ache in her bones from hours of tension and the violent images replaying in her mind. Back at their headquarters, Dante began immediate damage control, moving to contain the fallout. His actions were surgically precise. Calls to port officials, alerts to property managers of trespassers, and lawyers deployed to position his company as the victim of fraud. By noon, he had constructed an impeccable, entirely false story. The official narrative claimed a rogue manager at Meridian had run an illegal operation without the company's knowledge. The guilty parties were dealt with internally, keeping law enforcement at bay. Morelli Enterprises offered full cooperation, citing its new security measures. The story was airtight, professional, and a complete fabrication, but it was built to survive inspection, reinforced by the 3 years Dante spent crafting his legitimate image. "You're very good at this," Lila observed as he ended a call. "At what?" he asked. "At rewriting history after the fact, making it seem like you were never there." "I wasn't there. Victor used my company behind my back. That's the reality." "But you knew it was a possibility for 2 months." "I had a feeling. I had no proof until you found it." Dante relaxed into his chair. "This is the line between being involved and being a victim. Victims get sympathy. The guilty get investigations. And which are you? A victim?" Dante held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. "I am a man building a clean house on the ashes of a corrupt one. That means I decide which truths see light and which are buried. You don't have to like it, but you have to understand it to work here. And if I can't, then you're done, and we go our separate ways." Layla weighed his words against the past 12 hours of her life. The raw violence, the cold mind games, the flawless way Dante orchestrated Victor's ruin while ensuring his own innocence. His clinical brand of sociopathy should have sent her running to the nearest federal agent. And yet, it didn't. Beneath the monstrous acts, she saw a broken kind of justice, a man avenging his brother, taking immense risks to shield his company and its people. He had pulled her out of a fatal situation. A deeply illogical move when leaving her behind was the safer play. "I'm staying," she said at last. Dante gave a slight nod, as if confirming something he already knew. "Good. We have an ocean of work to do." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in erasing Victor's shadow. Distribution centers were quietly cleared and shuttered. The Newark containers were intercepted, their illegal cargo turned over to the authorities. Victor's buyers were sent quiet warnings about a compromised supply chain, urged to find new sources. Dante directed it all with his trademark chilling precision, managing information, delegating tasks, and ensuring every loose thread was cut before it could unravel. Watching him work, Layla started to see the true architecture of his power. It wasn't just built on fear, though fear was certainly one of its pillars. It was built on a brutal pragmatism, on the belief that every problem could be solved with the right amount of pressure. It was about knowing exactly when to use a blade and when to use a pen. At the same time, she felt a shift within herself. The urge that drove her to blow the whistle at her old firm wasn't gone. It was just being repurposed. Instead of exposing crimes to the law, she was now helping to bury them within a secret, internal system, model. That this internal contradiction failed to materialize was a troubling sign. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Dante's summons drew her to his office. It was late. After 9 in the evening, the building hollowed out and silent. On his desk sat a whiskey bottle, flanked by 2 glasses. "A drink?" he asked. "I've already expressed my preference." "Consider it a toast. We're in the clear. The authorities closed their investigation into Meridian. Victor hasn't been seen since they let him go. And for the first time in ages, we're profitable, no longer bleeding money to phantom consultants." Layla sank into a chair, taking the offered glass. "Where do you think he is?" "Victor, my guess is South America. Somewhere with weak extradition laws and cheap property. He'll rebuild, just not on our turf. But if he comes back, he won't." Dante took a swallow of amber liquid. "He knows returning would force my hand, and the next time there will be no warning." A loaded silence filled the space between them. Then, unexpectedly, Dante spoke. "Thank you." Layla's eyes lifted to his. For what? For finding the discrepancies, for having the tenacity to ignore my orders to stand down, for, he paused, his words chosen with surgical precision, for not running when you saw what this place truly is. The thought of running crossed my mind more than once. But you didn't. That's what matters. He refilled their tumblers. I meant what I said before. I don't keep people who aren't useful, but you've moved beyond useful, Ms. Bennett. You've become essential. Layla felt a sudden warmth creep up her neck, a physical reaction she fought to conceal. I'm only doing my job. You're doing more. You're helping me forge an enterprise with a future, something Marco would have wanted. A shadow of tension left Dante's face. He would have liked your mind, the way you refused to abandon a difficult question. I wish I could have met him. So do I. Dante stood, crossing to the window to watch the city lights burn below. For 5 years, I lived in a state of pure rage. At Victor myself, the universe for taking Marco, the only good soul in our family. That rage made me careful. It forced me out of the life that got him killed, but it also walled me off. I pushed away anyone who got close because closeness is a liability. He turned from the window to face her. You've breached those defenses. Layla could feel her own pulse quicken. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between you destroying my boss and nearly dying for my company, I became invested in your survival. And that presents a problem. A problem? Layla repeated. I'm your boss. You're my employee. There's a power imbalance that makes anything more deeply inappropriate, even predatory. And yet, he stopped, as if weighing the immense gravity of his words. And yet, I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what you think about things that have nothing to do with work, wanting to know you in ways that are irrelevant to your skill with spreadsheets. Layla set down her glass, a tremor in her hand. Dante, you don't have to say this. This isn't a proposition, it's the truth. And after everything we've been through, you deserve the truth. She rose, walked around the massive desk, and stopped a few feet from him, near enough to see the silver line of a scar by his brow, near enough to smell the whiskey and the clean, expensive scent he always wore. I've been thinking about you too, she said, her voice low, in ways that have nothing to do with my job, and it's terrifying knowing who you are, who I am, and that this is probably the single worst idea either of us has ever had. Probably, Dante agreed, but I don't want to stop thinking about it. Neither do I. For a long moment they stood, the air thick with unspoken things. Then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lifted his good hand to her face. His thumb brushed the arc of her cheekbone, a tender motion that was a complete contradiction to everything she knew of him. Tell me to stop, he murmured. No. He kissed her then. It was hesitant, a question as if he was testing if the moment was real, if she might shatter. When she kissed him back, the atmosphere shifted, the touch deepening into something that felt like destiny. They parted, breathless, and he rested his forehead on hers. This changes everything, he said. I know. Ways people will talk. They'll say you slept your way to the top, that I'm taking advantage of you. Let them talk. Oh, Layla, I don't care what they think. She drew back just enough to meet his gaze. I care about this. About you. About what this is becoming. Everything else is just noise. Dante smiled, and it was the first time she had ever seen it truly reach his eyes. You are going to be my ruin. Probably, she shot back, echoing his own word. But at least it will be interesting. For 3 months, they kept their secret, a remarkable achievement in an office that thrived on gossip. Claire knew within a fortnight. Lila saw it in the subtle shift of the receptionist's gaze from professional courtesy to a look of quiet clinical approval. Though reading Claire was always a difficult art, the whispers from the staff eventually started. Curious looks would follow her whenever Dante called her into his office, a clear questioning of her expanding role. Layla's performance of detached professionalism was a valiant but ultimately transparent failure. The consensus is that your promotion was a direct result of our sleeping together, Dante remarked one night in his apartment, their sanctuary from prying eyes. Is that an incorrect theory? Layla asked from the sofa, absorbed in a report while wearing his shirt, an undeniable symbol of their intimacy. Logically, no. Chronologically, yes. Your value was established long before this arrangement. Arrangement? Layla repeated, pushing for a definition. Is that what we're calling it? Dante stopped what he was doing. What would you call it? Something less temporary, something that admits that this is real? He closed his laptop and moved to sit with her. It's real. I just don't know a word that isn't either too casual or too much. Relationship. That works. Good. Layla went back to her papers, but he gently took them from her. There's something else we need to discuss, he said. That sentence is never a prelude to good news. It's not bad, just complicated. The careful choice of words telegraphed the weight of what came next. There's a loose thread from the Victor situation, a problem that's going to surface if I don't handle it. A knot of tension formed in Layla's stomach. What problem? His buyers, the client list from his server. Most were minor, but a couple have ties to larger criminal groups. Those groups want to know why their supply chain was broken. Can't you just... You tell them Victor is out of business and to find a new supplier. That message was delivered 3 weeks ago. Most have moved on, but 2 groups are still digging into Victor's sudden vanishing act. One of them has ties to my father's old world. Layla's back went ramrod straight. What does that mean? It means they know enough about my past to be suspicious, to wonder if I've gone back to my old ways. Dante got up and paced to the window. I have a meeting tomorrow night. Neutral territory. It's supposed to be a conversation, but these talks always come with unstated demands. What kind of demands? That I either become their new supplier to replace Victor, or I give them a very good reason why I won't. And if you can't convince them, they'll assume I took Victor out to steal his business. That leads to them either offering a partnership or trying to remove me as a competitor. The anxiety was sharp in Layla's voice. You can't go alone. I won't. Marcus and Leo are coming. He turned to her. I'm telling you this because things could get messy. If something happens, you need to know the plan for the company. Nothing will happen. It probably won't, but I don't operate on probably anymore. He crossed back to the couch and sat, the space between them charged. By corporate mandate, my absence triggers a transfer of power to a board I've chosen. You were added last week. Claire has the files. Her voice was a whisper. Dante. This is not melodrama. It is foresight. There is a difference. His hand covered hers. You have built this company as much as I have. You've earned the right to steer its future if I am no longer at the helm. You will be. That is the plan. But plans are not guarantees. She stifled the impulse to call it paranoia, recognizing it for what it was in his world, the highest form of risk management. I understand, she conceded. But when you return tomorrow, we are changing the subject. We'll talk about something mundane, like what's for dinner, or the color of these sad gray walls. A faint smile touched Dante's lips. Agreed. The next night, Lila was a ghost in his apartment, any attempt at work a useless distraction. The meeting was for 9. It was now 10:30, and her 2 texts hung unanswered in the digital void. At 11, she broke and called Marcus, his head of security. He is operational, Marcus said flatly, anticipating her question. The meeting is protracted. He will be in touch when it concludes. Define operational. Viable, uninjured, and locked in difficult negotiations. The other party is employing delaying tactics. How difficult? The kind that demands patience, not a tactical response. Believe me, Ms. Bennett, you would have been informed if things had turned problematic. Layla hung up, clinging to Marcus's detached assessment. She paced for another 40 minutes before the phone finally came to life. I am on my way, Dante said. The matter is settled. What does settled mean? It means I persuaded them that I am not and will never be engaged in their particular brand of commerce. They were displeased, but ultimately accepted the terms. That's it? They just accepted. I may have provided a financial apology for the inconvenience of Victor's departure and made it clear that any further interest in my affairs would be hazardous to their health. God, Dante! It's finished, Layla. That's the only point that matters. The sound of the city filtered through the call. I will be there in 20 minutes. Then we will have that normal conversation you asked for. He arrived in 18, looking drained but physically intact. Layla's embrace was a breach of protocol, fierce and desperate. I am fine, he murmured against her hair. I know, Marcus told me. That didn't make the waiting any less unbearable. You need to adjust. This is a component of being with me. Layla drew back. Being with you? Is that the phrase we're using now? Unless you can propose a better one. No, that one works. Her kiss was a forensic study of whiskey, and another, unnameable note. But I am holding you to the normal conversation. No more business tonight. No more whispers of threats. Just us. They ordered food that went untouched, growing cold. They watched a film whose plot never registered. They passed out on the couch, tangled in a position that promised morning stiffness, but delivered immediate peace. For one night, Dante Morelli was not a former syndicate boss forging a legitimate empire. He was just a man who laughed at the wrong time, felt the chill of Layla's feet, and held her like she was a priceless, fragile thing to be protected at all costs. It was the most normal evening Layla had experienced in months, a fragile seed of hope for their future. The real test came 6 weeks later when the FBI entered Morelli Enterprises asking about Meridian Holdings. Layla was at her desk as 2 agents, their federal status and unspoken uniform, moved past Claire toward Dante's office. She stood to intercept, but his door was already swinging open. Gentlemen, Dante's voice was a mask of polite cooperation, the sound of a man who had been expecting this. Please, step in. Ms. Bennett, hold my calls. The door clicked shut. Layla sank back into her chair, her heart hammering as she pretended to work. The story they had woven together was airtight. She knew every thread because she had helped spin it. But having it tested by federal investigators was a different kind of pressure than a dry run. After 45 minutes, the agents left, their expression suggesting dissatisfaction but no immediate cause for arrest. Moments later, Dante appeared in his doorway. "My office," was all he said. Lila grabbed her tablet and followed. He shut the door behind them, sitting down with a palpable weight. "They know about Victor," he stated. "How much did they know?" "That he ran an operation through Meridian and disappeared right as we reported an unsanctioned use of company resources. They want to determine if I was complicit in his vanishing act or merely a victim of his crimes." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. My assistant found accounting irregularities. Our internal audit uncovered that Gerald Renton was running an unauthorized side business. We terminated Renton and filed our report. Victor Rains was Renton's outside man who fled before we could question him." "Did they buy it?" "They are unconvinced, but suspicion is not proof, and proof is something our careful planning has denied them." Dante looked at her. "They will want to speak with you probably tomorrow. They will ask what you found, the sequence of events, and if you saw any sign I knew beforehand." Layla's throat was dust. "What do I say?" "The truth. You found discrepancies in a routine audit. You brought them straight to me. I launched an investigation and fired the people responsible. Do not offer opinions. Do not speculate. Do not try to protect me with lies. Just state the facts as they occurred." "No, including the fact that I went into that building after you expressly forbade it?" "Especially that fact. It proves you acted independently, which gives them exculpatory evidence against any theory of collusion on your part." His strategy was a model of his trademark cold logic, yet she was gripped by a moral dissonance. When she challenged the plan's integrity, he changed his approach. He ordered her to take any immunity deal she was offered to testify against him, casting it as a sterile necessity to shield her from the fallout of his world, effectively nullifying her will. His command was an undisguised act of dominion. In a desperate countermove, she confessed her love, a disclosure made under profound stress. The male subject, Dante, dismissed her emotional revelation, classifying it as a poor justification for perjury. She clarified she would be honest, but that her loyalty was absolute, a classic indicator of a trauma bond. Lila tried to release him from any obligation of reciprocity. She declared his isolation was now a burden they both carried, a statement that triggered a physical reaction. He kissed her with a mix of desperation and relief. He echoed her declaration of love, but it came with an immediate condition. Her survival must trump her loyalty. Her reply was that she would decide, based on the circumstances. He met this defiance with a smile, a tacit acknowledgement of her unbreakable will. The federal interrogation of Lila began the next day in a room engineered to exert psychological force. The subject delivered a polished narrative, excising the details of her abduction and unsanctioned interrogation. These omissions were a strategic choice to preserve her credibility by excluding bizarre, unverifiable claims that could imply she was a willing participant. The agents recorded her testimony impassively. Their final questions pivoted to her romantic ties with Dante, a textbook maneuver to establish a motive. She confirmed the relationship, dating its inception to 3 months earlier, well after the internal audit had closed. "My position was his assistant. Our proximity was a function of the job," she stated. Asked if their personal connection had compromised her professional duty, she flatly denied it, stating the corporate hierarchy was her only guide. After the interview, Lila felt as though she'd survived a medical procedure with unknown life-altering results. She later recounted the agent's specific questions about their relationship to Dante. She reviewed her testimony, verifying that she had adhered to their constructed timeline. When she asked for his analysis of her performance, he observed that their relationship gave the authorities a reason to doubt her word. Dante then clarified that without evidence of a prior connection, their theory was nothing more than conjecture. 2 weeks on, the investigation was officially closed, citing no grounds for indictment, though a formal letter suggested they implement more robust internal controls. The outcome was a victory in name only, as the collateral damage was severe. The board was gutted by resignations, and key client accounts were severed, signaling a catastrophic loss of trust. Publicly traded subsidiaries saw their stock value plummet by 12%. Dante surveyed the damage reports with his usual clinical air, forecasting a recovery fueled by sheer, relentless effort. Lila asked for a timeline. He projected 6 months to a year. His immediate plan was to launch an aggressive campaign of perceived legitimacy. Looking at the grim figures, Lila suggested a philanthropic venture, a foundation. Dante was initially dismissive, then saw the strategic utility of such an organization in laundering their public image. Lila corrected his aim, insisting the real purpose was to build a worthwhile legacy for a man named Marco, not just to perform reputational CPR. Dante relented, recalling that Marco himself had believed in building things for the family, not tearing them down. From this, the Marco Morelli Foundation was born, its purpose a lifeline of scholarships for the city's forgotten youth. It was a masterpiece of public relations, slowly recasting the shadow of Dante and his empire. The pressure was a crushing weight. But within that crucible of stress, a profound internal alchemy began. The constant watchfulness in Dante's eyes started to fade, replaced by alien behaviors like an unprompted smile. He decreed an entire weekend free from the company's grasp. In a secluded place, he gave voice to a new reality. He was no longer waiting for the sky to fall. For the first time, he spoke of a future that might not end in ruin. Lila met his gaze, affirming their fragile peace and the Foundation's triumph. Dante's quiet agreement was an admission of a strange new peace. 6 months after the investigation ended, at the Foundation's first ceremony, 20 scholarships were given. Dante stood before the crowd and spoke of his brother with a raw, unvarnished honesty. He talked of Marco's faith in second chances. From the back, Lila watched, a storm of pride and the sheer relief of having survived churning within her. After the speeches, a young scholarship winner approached Dante to thank him. He waved off her gratitude, insisting the award was merely a key for a door she had to open herself, adding that she must one day do the same for another. The exchange seemed to settle something inside him. He murmured that Marco would have loved this, a truth Lila could only echo. They watched the quiet celebration, a moment that threw into sharp relief the harrowing distance they had both traveled. Their bond had been forged in combat, now reshaped into a wary alliance. Fractures remained, bitter fights over control and decisions he made alone. His ghosts were a constant weight on the fragile future they were trying to build. Yet their refusal to surrender was a silent promise of what could be. A year later, Dante asked her to marry him. It wasn't a romance. It was a business proposition delivered in the sterile aftermath of a grueling meeting. Lila laughed at the clinical precision of it all. But he was unshaken, his gaze direct as he spoke of a life with her. something real beyond the blood and balance sheets, something that is ours, Dante stated. She closed her laptop and moved into his space, settling on his lap, a welcome chaos in his ordered world that made him smile. Yes, she confirmed. Yes, he asked, needing to hear it again. Yes, I'll marry you despite your completely inept proposal and the fact that you can never turn off your work brain. Those are fair points. I'm marrying you anyway. 6 months on, they were wed in a simple gathering at the foundation, with a small circle of witnesses. Claire was there, her face a mask of what looked almost like approval. A change in Dante was noted. An old associate remarked that he now sometimes argued with words before resorting to fists. Lila's parents were trapped in a state of shock, unable to reconcile their daughter's choice with a man on a federal watch list. Their union was a study in controlled chaos, finding a strange, functional rhythm. The following years were a relentless battle to drag a criminal empire into the light, hounded by the ghosts of its past and the scrutiny of the present. But there were victories. The foundation grew, a beacon for countless students. The business broke new ground, forging alliances with trust instead of fear. Dante's public image slowly morphed from that of a crime lord to a man offering second chances. After 2 years, Lila became COO, her skill silencing the whispers of nepotism. She rebuilt the company's bones, making it transparent and strong, becoming the voice of their mission to break the cycles of violence. They bought a house, a space to exist as partners and individuals. A dog was brought in, which Dante met with a staged annoyance that failed to hide his immediate affection. Their partnership was tested and tempered in fires of conflict and compromise. 5 years after they first met, Lila stood before the foundation's new home, a restored building in a part of the city reborn. She ran her hand over a wall of files, a gallery of faces belonging to the lives they had changed. Dante came to stand beside her, his voice low. We built this. Lila admitted this life was nothing like the one she had planned, but it was better. He reached for her, confessing he never believed a man like him could find his way back from the darkness. He said she had proven him wrong. Lila corrected him gently, saying it was a shared victory, that his own will to change had to be there first. He conceded that her belief in him had been the spark. Lila asked what part of their journey was most precious. Answering her own question, she said it was the process, the constant struggle and rebuilding, a reality she called real and far better than perfect. Dante responded with a long, slow kiss, a startlingly public act of love in this monument to their new life. When they parted, Lila noticed a young man by the door, his anxiety a mirror of her own past. Oh, he was here for an interview. She smiled and led him inside. Later that night, in the quiet of their home, Dante said something she had never heard from him before. I'm happy. In the dim light, Lila watched his face for the truth of it. He explained that for the first time he could remember, he wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She told him he deserved this feeling, and so did she. Then she listed all the little ways he drove her crazy, and he agreed with everyone. He, in turn, pointed out her obsessive need for order, which she did not deny. When he asked what she'd been investigating lately, she confessed to a minor breach of his privacy, and he just laughed. They fell asleep tangled together in the home they had made, a life built from the wreckage of their past. This was no fairy tale. There was no guarantee of peace. Storms would come again, but they had each other and a foundation that was rewriting futures, all built on something stronger than fear. They were living proof that people could change, that a bond could be forged in the most brutal of circumstances, that savagery and tenderness could live in the same heart. In the end, this was enough. For them, it was everything.